Segment in the Bitcoin standard that I want to talk about today, and that is the concept of what is actually rarity. A commodity is rare relative to the technological advancements that we have. And in fact, you name the price, you name the technology, and I define what's rare. In other words, nothing, we never run out of anything. We're never in a position where we literally can't produce something. There's no such thing as absolute scarcity, except Bitcoin. And this is really powerful. It's something I got from the Bitcoin standard. I've already spoken about the book. I think it's a fantastic economics book. If nothing, it's just a very good economics book. It's not full of formulas. There's no mathematical sophistry or any of that bullshit. It's just really good thoughts. It's like Karl Popper, epistemology. Again, no mathematical sophistry, just really fundamental understanding of human behavior. And the concept of rarity really is interesting because if you want to create a rare asset for money, you can't really do anything with commodities because no matter what, somebody once told me, a guy in the oil industry told me, you show me the price and I show you the supply of oil. In other words, if the price is high enough, I'm going to burn tires. I'm going to, do tar sands. I mean, there's so much oil at a high price that there's no such thing as really us running out of resources. Now, of course, that is also, if you push that to the extreme, you have to admit that we will at some point run out of resources by definition. The resources on Earth are not infinite, but what is infinite, and this is not the beginning of infinity, is our ability to create knowledge. So we don't even know what the resource of the future will be and what the scarcity of the future will be. Today, lithium could be scarce. Tomorrow, maybe some electron type behavior of an atom that we consider completely irrelevant today could become very valuable. So we don't really know what is going to, what's the knowledge that we're going to create. And having said that, now I want to talk about this and sort of put it in the context also of the current financial markets. This is not even on podcast. It's September 29th, 2022. It's Trindle for the day. The fund is down 5.4%. The market is down 1.5%. For the year, we're down 34.4%. The market is down 23.6. We're underperforming by 10.8%. So, where do we stand? Like I said, let's talk about the market. I'm sorry. Of course, this warrants a little bit more conversation, having such a big drawdown. I would say that we have two situations right now in the market which are scary. One is, of course, the extremely rapid increase of U.S. Treasury yields. And then we have the situation in England, which is probably a harbinger of worse things to come. What's going on in England is that the yields, so the British version of the Treasury bond, are collapsing. And whatever reason that is, it could be outflows from people that are afraid of the currency. It could be just Russians getting out of the UK. I don't know, but the problem is people are selling gilts and the pension funds are on the water. So the Bank of England was forced to intervene. And this is, of course, a big deal because you have this situation, and that's why the markets rallied yesterday, where people kind of thought, oh, this is, the banks are capitulating. Fundamentally, they're capitulating the same way the Bank of Japan actually recently supported the yen. So the banks are giving up. We have this perpetual QE, and this idea that we will fight inflation is not going to work because the costs of a slowdown in the economy and a collapse of the bond markets, given the amount of debt that we have, is just way too high. This was the narrative yesterday. Well, today that narrative got reversed. We have a complete collapse of the markets now. To me, this looks like a sell-off, a liquidation, and I was confirmed in that belief because there is liquidation in England. Clearly, the Bank of England had to intervene. We have people like Stanley Druckenmiller all of a sudden giving speeches and being quoted everywhere, and that's typically the kind of time that he likes to be present. So all of these signs are, in my view, very strong that we have a correction driven by liquidation in the markets. For us, not much is changing in that sense. We have been dabbling in the with the idea of shorting the euro, and that probably is still a good trade because that's the next shoe to drop, and the ECB will have to intervene. But again, we'd much rather be on the other side of that trade when things recover and make the money with productive assets than play the short game. Now, it might be a little bit lazy on our side, but when you understand that you're not really good at something, I think it's better not to do it, even though it feels a little bit complacent. It's still better not to do it, and we're just not in that game. And if we can short the euro now, and let's say the currency collapses now 10%, I'm not sure we would hold on to it. So do we want to play this for 10%? That those are the kinds of thoughts that we have, and so far the conclusion is not to get involved. But nevertheless, we have this interesting situation where it could be the case that the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan have been already forced on their knees. The next one definitely is going to be the ECB. We're going to see carnage in the ECB, and then finally the Fed. Is the Fed going to budge? Are they going to reverse and start buying treasury bonds if the yield collapses too much? Don't forget U.S. pension funds. People are sitting on massive, massive amounts of treasuries. They're losing value, and they're losing a lot of value. And these types of investors are not very good at taking losses. Now, these are mark-to-market losses, but they're still losses. And yeah, we're probably up for some really, really rough rides here in the markets. That's to say the least. We are managing our leverage, laser focused on our leverage. That's the only thing we really control right now without giving up on the upside. So that's where we stand. Now let's get back to the conversation of today. It's about scarcity, and it's really interesting. The Bitcoin standard, Sabrina Moss, talks about this and says, look, there's no such thing as scarcity. Scarcity is defined by time, investment, and knowledge, and that's very much David Deutschian. Anything you can consider oil being scarce until you find better ways to dig for oil. We had the fracking revolution changing the concept of scarcity for oil and gas, for example. We will have other revolutions if the oil price went up. Actually, we have the electric car revolution, which was driven somewhat by the oil. I would say the correlation there is very light, but there's still a correlation. So again, there's no such thing as absolute scarcity. There's only relative scarcity towards time preference, towards, and more importantly, and this is David Deutsch, and it's not even the time preference, it's really the knowledge. So to have any kind of Malthusian argument is ludicrous because you don't know what kind of knowledge will be developed in the future. And as we know, our academic industrial complex might not be the most efficient knowledge creation machine, but it's still, if you put enough money and people on something, they do actually create something. And if, let's say, we have a massive shortage now of lithium because of the lithium-ion battery, I'm pretty sure we will come up with other stuff that can replace the lithium in the battery. So again, it's a function of time preference, like Safedin says, but it's also primarily a function of knowledge. And because we can't predict knowledge, we can't really make predictions about scarcity. But Bitcoin now, this is one of the big qualities of Bitcoin, is that you have absolute scarcity. So Bitcoin has that quality, which is pretty interesting. So there's no asset really that, at least that I know of, that has this quality and has all the other qualities, such as being a good store of value and having transferability, and you can sell it and buy it in liquid, and it's transferable, and it's relatively low transaction cost. I mean, compared to, let's say, gold or seashells or cigarettes or things like that. So and we're, as we speak, the transaction costs are being lowered dramatically through things like the Lightning Network. So there's absolutely a case to be made that we, for the first time in human history, we have absolute scarcity, which algorithmically defined. Now, having said that, there's one caveat though, that when I listen to the Bitcoin standard, I'm listening to the book, by the way. So when I read it or listen to it, either way, there's a flaw in the whole concept, and there's a flaw which makes me believe. I don't know how safe is Bitcoin, because here's the thing: like, even in the Bitcoin standard, Safedin talks about the proof of work concept, which basically says only one thing. It says, well, if I want to take over the Bitcoin network, I can only do it by destroying it, and therefore I destroy my value. And that's something that Satoshi Nakamoto also considered. But he's not considering the fact that, let's say, if I'm Vladimir Putin, I'm okay investing, let's say, $500 billion to destroy the Bitcoin network, or I don't know how much the market cap is, because I'm still better off paying this money, which is, by the way, now my money. It's whatever money. It's funny money if you want, but this is true because this is a big threat. I mean, if the Federal Reserve, the CIA, the Congress, the U.S. Congress, if everybody sat together and said, "Look, we need to get rid of this fucking thing," because, excuse me for my French, because this thing is threatening our power, but it's threatening our way of life, and blah blah blah. I'm just not sure, and nobody has ever talked about this. What I'm saying is the proof of work, yes, intrinsically is a safe way to keep a trustless network alive, but it's not really an insurance against attacks because you can actually decide to invest trillions to destroy the network. I'm not sure how the Bitcoin people answer that. Again, I find that is a flaw. That is a little bit of a flaw. But then, of course, this is kind of along the lines of saying, well, the dollar is not safe either because Vladimir Putin could decide to destroy the dollar, and in the same, like, by doing that, destroy himself. I mean, he could do that, right? He could say that, do that, blah blah blah, and he's kind of in the process of doing that right now. So it's not that terribly different, the argument. Now, having said all of that, my point here is very simple. I'm just saying that within all the good stuff that I'm reading and listening to and hearing and blah 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 from the Bitcoin network, I just have this one question, which I'm not sure how to answer, and that is, um, how how safe is it? Because you can actually attack it and destroy it if you want. Is this really like the internet? But actually, now that I'm thinking, you could even do that with the internet, right? You could theoretically destroy the internet in the same sort of manner. You could say, well, it's going to cost me trillions and trillions, but at least it's destroyed, and I can go back to some feudalist regime or something like that. So maybe my argument is a bit too far-fetched. It's just a thought. But let's get back to the point of absolute scarcity, which is the beauty of Bitcoin. You really have absolute scarcity. And what's good about absolute scarcity is the following. It gives people a clear understanding of what's up, what is. This is the amount of money, end of story. And this, in the same realm, like, let's say, you own a Bitcoin, and that Bitcoin could be worth $1 trillion in whatever, 100 years. It doesn't really matter because you have the Satoshis, 100 million Satoshis for Bitcoin, and I am sure the network could bring in another another 100 million Satoshis of, so that the scalability and the calibration of Bitcoin is not a problem. I think that's something that the consensus algorithm could easily come up with. What's obviously much more difficult is to fork the network in a different direction, and people have tried, they've not succeeded. Let's say change the the block size, change the amount of transactions change the block size, or that's been a big sort of war, and maybe you can even change the algorithm, but it's not possible because, again, Bitcoin has escape velocity. So if you do that, you will have a forked Bitcoin, but then this Bitcoin will stay, and this Bitcoin is much stronger than the new Bitcoin, and that, I think, that happened with Bitcoin Cash already. So we're in that same sort of situation. We've been there already, and we can get back there very easily. So to summarize again, relative scarcity is defined as what we have: a gold and an oil, and it's defined by a time preference and opportunity cost, and most importantly, knowledge. And this is very David Deutschian, and this is also what the Bitcoin standard is saying. Versus absolute scarcity, which is theoretically Bitcoin delivers, it's a really strong concept because it just changes the behavior. And I think this is one of the biggest takeaways from Safedin's book, which is, like, money really influences behavior. That's the powerful thing, and that's something that economists, to my understanding, have never really studied other than the Austrians. You see, the money is not, well, let me rephrase that. Economists have certainly thought about changing the money supply, the Keynesians particularly, but even the Friedman people, and because they've kind of intrinsically understood and thought and believed that money does influence behavior. So money is not neutral. Money is not just a medium of exchange. it is also a driver of behavior. And therefore, having sound money with absolute scarcity, in my opinion, can really, really have very, very profound effects on society. I've said that before. Imagine an experiment with West USA on a Bitcoin standard and East USA on the existing dollar regime. There's no question to me that 50 or 70 years from now, I'm using the 70 years time frame because that's kind of what it wasn't 70 actually, it was 50 years that the German experiment lasted, or even last 40 years. Actually, not why am I saying 70? It was 40 years. It was 70 years ago, I think, that they started with the wall. Yeah. So anyway, you take 40 years, 50 years, even 20 years. I mean, you have to give it some time for the Bitcoin standard type country to, evolve, its institutions to evolve, and the behavior starts kicking in into institutions, because institutions just reflect behavior. If behavior reflects money, so it's almost like in biology where you have DNA, RNA, proteins, and then some outcome. Here you have money, and then which would be the DNA, and then the RNA, and the proteins would be like institutions, and then the outcome would be things like living standard. And so my point is that money, hard money, will improve the living standards. Money has a direct influence on the behavior of people, and therefore increase living standards if you're hard money, and decrease living standards if you're soft money. Thank you.